A very good morning, children. How are you all? Hope you are following all the previous sessions of the unit, which is diversity in the living organisms. Okay, children. So today we are going to move to the next session, next discussion point. That is, what is the need of classification? In the last class, we have ended where we studied about the classification, right? The animals are classified based on their structure, differences, and similarities. So today, here now we will discuss what is the actual need of the classification of the living organisms which are living around us. So the first point is that knowledge and better understanding. That means this particular classification will give us a better understanding. Okay, it gives us a knowledge about the organisms which we are going to study. It gives a very clear understanding about the organisms which we are going to study only if they are properly classified. So now what is classification? Okay, everything will come later. Okay, second point. Classification makes you study the organisms in a proper and a systematic way. In a proper way and also in a systematic manner. So if you want to study the animals in a proper way and systematic manner, that's only classification will give you a great help. Otherwise, you cannot study it in a proper manner. Okay. Third one, comparison. So actually this comparison, right? That means if you are comparing one organism with the other, it becomes very easier. It becomes very easier if you know the classification. If only you know in which group it is. If you know, for example, if you are comparing a rabbit and a butterfly, then it will be very easy that if you know the characteristics of the insects and also the characteristics of the animals which belongs to the rabbits, then only it will be easy to compare. Otherwise, you have to compare the butterfly with all the other organisms, or you have to compare the rabbit with all the other organisms. So only if you are well versed with the classification, if there is a classification, if all the animals are properly classified, then only you will be able to compare the organisms in a proper way. And coming to the fourth, okay, so because of this classification, what you can do is you can understand the relationship between the living organisms. What is the kind of relationship they have with the other organisms, and also you can know the interdependence. That is how they are interdependent on each other, how they are dependent on each other. Here interdependence means how they are dependent on each other. So here how they are dependent on each other. So if you know the classification, you can know which animal is dependent on which. For example, if you know the characters of a tiger, then you can then you will know that this is a carnivorous animal. So because it is a carnivorous animal, it eats meat, right? So then you can take a deer, right? Deer is completely dependent upon the plants because it is a herbivore, it eats the plants. Then also you can compare in this way that this tiger, as it doesn't eat the plants, it won't eat the animals which have, okay, the other animals. So it depends upon the deer, right? So that is how you can know the interdependence of the animals, right? The deer depending on the plants, or the tiger depending upon the deer. So this is the interdependence. Next is you can have a very focused way of studying. So if you want to know about one particular organism, if you can stay focused only if you know the classification of the organisms, right? And also because there's a huge population of the animals, different animals are there, different plants are there, different living organisms are there. If you want to study only one particular thing, and only one particular animal or a plant, so you need to have a proper focus. So that focus only you will get to know when you have a proper knowledge of classification. So only if the animals are and plants are classified in the proper way. Next, this classification will give you an idea of the evolution, right? You know what is an evolution? Yes. So how the animals evolved. So what is the idea behind the evolution, right? So only you will know if you know the classification. So if you know the classification, that means how the animals are classified, then you can go to the process of evolution, how these animals might be. For example, you can take a human being. Example, you can take the human being. Now, you can also take the example of the ape. Okay. So now we all, according to science, we have to believe that. According to science, we have to believe that the ape has transformed into a human being, isn't it? So how the transformation might have occurred? So it might have taken a long time. It might have taken a long time for the characters to change. Now, ape is completely different, and then man is completely different. So if you want to study about the man, so you need to know the classification of the man. So where did he come from? Where did he come from? So only if you keep on talking about the apes and chimpanzees and whatnot. So if you go in this order, you will come to know how this man has evolved, from what species man has evolved. So what is the basic characteristics of the human being before he was transformed into a man. So that is how you can easily study. That is only possible when you know what is a classification. So these are all the different steps in the what is the need of classification. Okay, children. So now we'll see what is classification, as we have talked about the evolution process. So we will now talk about the what is evolution and what is classification. So that is what we are going to study about now. Okay, children. Okay, children, so now we'll talk about the topic which is classification and evolution. Classification and evolution. So all the organisms, okay, all the living organisms I'm talking about, they are identified and they are classified basing on two things. Basing on two things. You know what are they? One is the, let me write here. Classification is done on basing on two things. One is structure and the second one is the function. Okay, so it is completely based on the structures of the organisms and the functions of the organisms. Okay, so if you see, some characters are also like, they are completely different from the other organism. For example, the characters of a cat are completely different from the characters of a dog. So if you see the differences, they are completely different, isn't it? The characters of those organisms are different. Now if you take a cat, okay, at the same time you take the tiger, see the structure, the body, the way you can find some similarities in between them, isn't it? So it might have taken some time, a long time, for the animals to get the different changes. Now let me tell you in this way. For example, if you take like the last example we have taken, we'll take the example of the ape, okay, and we'll take the example of the man. So now this was in the very early stages of evolution, right? So there were apes, right? Before apes, there were some organisms which were similar to that of the ape, right? So now this ape has taken a very long time to change its characters or to transform into other organisms. So to change the characters of an organism, it might take some time. Okay, now if you see the same characters in the man, now they are completely different from that of the ape. You can see they are absolutely different in their way of behavior, the way they use the intelligence, okay, the way they have the urbanization, right, and the way they are behavior they have, the kind of attitude they have, the kind of intelligence they have, they are completely different from that of the ape. So a man to transform from ape to a man, it has taken a very long time. In this, lot of changes you can see. All these changes, what we call it as variations. So you can see lot of variations from the time ape has converted to man, transformed to man. So it might have taken a very long time. Okay, some of the animals might have also changed their characters in this way. Okay, let me explain like this. Okay, so now for example, there is an animal called as, X. Okay, there's an animal called as X. Now this X animal lives in a normal climate. Now what happened is, now in search of food, it has gone to a place where the climate is hot. The climate is hot. Now, if the animal has gone to the place where the climate is hot, now they have to change their characteristics according to the climate here, isn't it? If it is a very, very hot climate, there will be bodily changes. Bodily changes. You can see the change of the different characteristics. So that will not be in a one generation. It might take some hundreds and thousands of generations to acquire characteristic features like this. So once, after a very long time, after a long time, after many generations, you can see that this animal has adapted to this particular hot environment. In the same way, if this X also goes to a cold climate where there is absolutely cold and all, now it has to habituate to this cold climate. So now they will also form some different characteristics so that they can live in this cold climate. So that is how a lot of changes are brought in the animals according to the time. Evolution is nothing but acquiring the change. Evolution is nothing but the acquiring the change. So time plays a major role in observing these characteristics in the animals, isn't it? So time is one of the major factor in the evolution because animals have taken a lot of time to change. So evolution is nothing but acquiring the change. Now what is classification? Classification is nothing but the grouping of organisms basing on their structures, similarities, differences, whatnot into different groups. Into different groups where it will be very, very easy for everybody to identify them, understand them, compare them, know about them, to focus on them. So all these things, right? So this is how we can know what is classification and what is evolution. Now if you come to the Charles Darwin also, if you come to Charles Darwin, he has written a book called as The Origin of a Species in the year 1859. 1859, he has written a book called as The Origin of Species. In this book, he tells everybody that, see, what are the organisms which you are seeing now, these organisms doesn't have the same characteristics, right? At the time of the evolution. So at the from the generations and generation after generations to habituate to that particular climate. Maybe it's a hot climate or a cold climate, maybe to habituate to that particular environment, temperature, climate, right? So these organisms might have changed their characters. They have accumulated different kinds of variations in their body. So the animals which you are seeing now, they are not exactly when they have at the beginning of the evolution. At the beginning of the evolution, the dog which we are seeing now is not the same. Okay, basing on the place where it is habituated, or basing on the climate where it has to live, basing on the food it has to take, so it has changed its characteristic features. So that is what Charles Darwin has explained as in the book called as The Origin of Species. Okay, so we can conclude that the older organisms are very much simpler in their characteristic features when you compare them with this particular generation. Okay, so now this is what classification and evolution all about. Okay, this is the introduction of classification and evolution. Evolution is nothing but the acquiring change in the living organisms. Classification is grouping the organisms basing on their structure, functions, differences and similarities. Okay, children. So now we'll see about the history of the classification. History of classification. Okay, children, so now we are talking about the classification, right? So our main topic is classification. So in India, classification was completely based on, okay, I'm talking about the first and second century. First and second AD. So at that particular time, the classification was completely based upon the medicinal value of the plants. Okay, the plants were first divided based on their medicinal value. So there was a scientist whose name is Charaka, and also there was another person whose name is Sushruta, right? About Sushruta, you might have studied in your seventh class, right? This is the same man who performs a surgery on an injured person who comes to his house where his nose is completely injured. He performs a plastic surgery using all the medicinal plants. Okay, so this Sushruta and Charaka, they belong to the first and second century AD. At the time, they divided the plants based on their medical value. They classified the plants based on their medical value. So Sushruta is also known for the surgeries which are being performed. So he performed many surgeries, right? He used the vine as an anesthesia. Okay, he used the leaves, okay, and different things to make a plastic surgery. So he used several leaves and to cure the wounds. So like this, he had a very good knowledge in the plants. At the same time, Charaka, they, they classified around 200 plants which are based on the medicinal value. They classified them into different categories. That is how the Charaka and Sushruta worked out. And then there is another man who also Parasar, right? He is a man who documented, he has written those names of the plants which he found that they are medicinally useful to us. He classified them based on the flowers. Mainly it is dealing with the structure of the flowers. So basing on the structure of the flowers and their medicinal importance, he classified several plants into different groups. So that is how classification started here in our India, right? And then what all this classification is about, okay? How are these animals and plants and even the microorganisms, how they are classified? Okay, we are going to study in our next class. Until then, see you all. Have a great day.